Hi everyone, welcome to Stop the Bleeding. I am so excited today. You are here for a treat. You know, this podcast is about talking about healing and also pain. But Dr. Nicole, in this latest book, Reparenting the Inner Child, gives us all the tools we need to start healing. Dr. Nicole is a Cornell graduate, and she's a holistic psychologist who offers so many different ways to heal ourselves. She makes healing easy, but you know what? She talks about dedication and discipline. So you're here for a treat. I'm excited to have Dr. Nicole here so we could dive in, get deep, get real, and learn how to reparent ourselves at any given time. Now our conversation starts with amazing, brilliant Dr. Nicole LePera. After writing all these great books that everybody knows what they are, I want to know what made you decide it is time to talk about inner child healing in this big, wonderful book. What was the point you woke up and you said, whatever I've done is good, but not good enough. I need to talk more about this.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, first of all, Zahra, thank you for who you are, for embodying the work, for supporting so many others within their own journeys. Obviously now through creating this space where we can be in conversation. I was talking with Arthur, who's here with me today, about the first time we connected. I can't remember how many years ago it was. And so wholeheartedly, when I want to express my gratitude to you, I mean it. I mean, you saw and resonated with my work from such an early space where I was just kind of getting used to sharing my work more publicly. And so my connection with you is so very meaningful. And I was honored. It was the easiest yes the second you reached out to me and said that you had a podcast coming down the pipeline. So I really hope you feel my gratitude reflected right back to you because your support has meant so much. And honestly, to answer your question, probably for as long as I've been in practice, this concept, while I might not have called it the inner child, though I did so a couple years ago when I first started to share online, I met this idea. I'm not the first person. I did not coin the term inner child, but I had done some reading about this idea. And at this point in my journey of, becoming a clinical psychologist, I had an awareness that childhood impacted us. Though if I'm honest, it wasn't until I had a practice with very wise, insightful, and committed individuals who would come into my office at Philadelphia in the time is where it was. And week after week, and we would, I think, make progress, come to a new insight, a new awareness, even come up with a game plan for a new action to break the pattern or relieve the suffering that brought the client into my room. And what I continue to hear week after week is increasing frustration, hopelessness, even at times with this idea that this isn't working. And I was living that experience. So for me, of course, I began to speak about this need for a holistic model where we involve the body and our nervous system and not just us, our relationships and our environment, because all of that impacts us. Yet I became aware that I haven't really kind of in an easy, understandable, accessible, and practical way described what the inner child is, how it is that this early experience lives within us. So this work was then an offering where I spent the last 3+ years kind of thinking about how can I really translate this concept of childhood and this inner child part of us that all of us maintain well into our adulthood, even if we're beyond childhood. How can I explain that in a way that really allows readers to understand that part is still impacting us to this day, but more so give some practical tools to create the change that we're all desiring.
Thank you for that. We all are desiring the change, and with all the loud noises that is happening with social media. I mean, some people like you actually use your platform to teach, to heal, and we come to you because we want to get some answers. But there's so much loud noises that we need to have those moments that we could actually connect to ourselves and see what is it that I'm really seeking and how am I taking care of myself. So this book has been such a great way to kind of recenter myself. And for people that are watching, I met my inner child at 52. So whatever age you guys are, it's not late. And I was so blessed, and I had the privilege to witness Dr. Nicole's live meditation. And I started sobbing for like hours after after the meditation. So what I love about your work is not about an age, it's not about a stage, it's about the willingness to sit and feel the pain and push through the pain and get out of the pain. And I want to put the book back there because it just looks so pretty. Anyways, thank you for that. One of the most powerful ideas in the book is that awareness alone doesn't create change. Why, Dr. Nicole, so many people intellectually understand their patterns, yet they still find themselves, repeating them, like wrong relationships. So the question is, why do you think it happens?
So insight, awareness, logic, the ability to rationalize, imagine new future scenarios, all of those come from a very different part of the brain than where our inner child lives. Scientifically speaking, it's called the prefrontal cortex. It's the ability to, at times, delay impulsive actions, make more responsive choices. Again, like I said earlier, think logically, think toward the future, use insight and awareness into inspiring new action. The inner child, the part in which many of us find ourselves stuck, is a part that comes from a much older, more emotionally driven part of our brain. Now, of course, I'm really simplifying kind of neurology in the brain, but what I'm referencing here is called our older limbic system, this emotionally driven system that was actually the first system that developed back when we were infants. Because before we had language, before we had logic, before we had maturity, before we could, use and gain insight and awareness, all we had were the sensations in our body and our body's evolutionarily driven survival responses, or the kind of physiological shifts that happen when our body registers not just a physical threat in our environment, but also an emotional threat in our environment. So I really appreciate you even acknowledging, I was 52 years of age in the first moment where I met my inner child, because this part that I'm talking about, that's wired into us, the part that learned how to handle unpredictability, deal with conflict or disconnection, how to get our needs met. Again, all of that part is wired into this very early survival-driven space. And that's the part why for so many of us in moments now, whether we're 52, 42, 72, logically, we could have insight, we could have awareness. In a moment, we could know we're safe, though our body, is still reacting as if there's a threat at hand. Our heart begins to race. Our muscles begin to clench and tense. Our breathing shifts and changes. And for some of us, that happens in a moment where perhaps there's conflict, Because perhaps in an earlier time in childhood, I have learned to stay quiet, to shut down when there's something that is possibly, dangerous, such as conflict. So logically, I might understand that this is an important conversation. I want to seek understanding with this person that I'm in conflict with, I want to negotiate a new outcome, but my body is saying a completely different story, My body is reacting as if conflict is danger, which is why for some of us, we feel that tension in our body. We actually avoid or flee the uncomfortable conversation. And there are a million moments. Maybe for another person listening, it's not conflict at all. Maybe you're like me. I have learned to always push myself past my limits, overextend myself, always seeking praise and validation. Even when logically, I could sit here and tell all of us, we're all worthy just for being who we are, not doing a thing. Mm-hmm. You just have this inherent sense of worthiness. Yet, I can logically know that, but my body, is still reacting in moments where I decide to rest or to say no to a new project or to put out a project that's less than perfect. My body in those moments, is saying something different. It is saying that criticism or any variety of negative feedback, that is the threat, So that then inspires me not to shut down like that first example, but for me, inspires me to keep acting sometimes when I'm well beyond my limits or my capacity. So there's a million other moments, but again, I'm hoping this is beginning to illustrate why we could have insight, awareness. We could come to a new conclusion. Oh, this habit doesn't work. I want to change it. Yet what's happening in real time for the large majority of us is in real time, that emotionally driven limbic system is actually taking over and preventing us from making those new choices.
Wonderful. Thank you for that. And To add to what you just said, I used to be told by my mother that I am lazy, I'm a sloppy, I'm not organized, I never finish, all of that. And it's so funny, I'm 59 and I had a moment in New York that I'm celebrating. I'm here, I'm going to this amazing conference, I'm so excited. But I look at my hotel room and I'm like, oh my God, my mom's voice is so loud that I don't deserve this because I am messy, I'm a sloppy, I'm unorganized. And honest to God, I'm getting chills because I may even want to cry. All the makeup is going to melt, but who cares? I am so grateful I had the book with me, and I honestly opened up the page and I started reading, and I just love the way you talk to us like a kind, loving therapist, mother, adult, that we could talk to ourselves like that. Like I literally sit down after I cried and I had to put the makeup back again after I finished reading this, that, you know what, at this moment, I'm going to choose to pause. And I'm going to have a different reaction. My mom is not here. I'm not blaming my mother, because what I love about this book, you talk about there's no blaming, there's no shaming, there's no guilting. We are just here to acknowledge our caregivers did not have the resources we have. They did their very best. And at this moment that I'm calm, what do I choose to tell? What are stories? Well, I'm jet lagged. I'm tired. I didn't sleep at all. My hotel room was loud, and I'm excited to go. So I'm not gonna, and I'm already late. I'm not gonna spend an hour cleaning this room. I'm gonna come back and clean it later. So what I love about your work and your book is, I want everybody to stop actually and go order this book, because honest to God, if you cannot find a good therapist, but you really need a wonderful voice to talk to you, get this book, download it on Audible, and or listen to Dr. Nicole's free videos on YouTube, because it is really changing the world. So I just had to add my personal story, and this is the chapter about resilience that I love that chapter, and I read it over and over. So anything that you like to add to what I just said? Someone that is 65 and is watching this and is like, what would you say to that someone that lost hope?
First thing that I would say is I want to celebrate all of the listeners here that are taking time and space, are curious, are interested in conversations like this, right? Because this, for many of us, is the beginning of a journey of whether it's increasing awareness, which is the first step to creating change, which then becomes second step, right? Making new choices. And so what I want to say, at any age, change is possible. Even going back to wisdom that you were kind of sharing a bit earlier, is our generationally, we live quite literally in the information age now, where there's information available at our fingertips, often conflicting information. We don't know who to believe. There's so much information, right? Our generations of ancestors, our parents included, have not had this experience, right? Where information was much more limited, was much more controlled. And at times, even, I will be the first to acknowledge accountability, coming out of my field of clinical psychology, was we are now learning in real time was wrong, right? Even parenting experts up until, as recent. I think in some even places in America, there is still a lack of awareness of how immature in terms of a developmental state our nervous system is when we're born. So much so that we think that infants that are just born, whose nervous systems aren't yet developed, there are still some doctors and clinicians in my field that would say, oh, well, to raise a strong, resilient child, which is what I imagine all parents to some extent, right, intend to do, there are still some people that believe that to do that, the child should be left alone to develop the resilience by, right, crying it out, soothing themselves. So I want to emphasize that most of us, again, were raised, even those of us who had well-intentioned, perhaps even present parents, had limited information, had limited resources. I think a lot, too, just about living here in the United States, a very new country, which means most of our ancestors 1 or 2 generations ago had to immigrate to a new land. I wonder then, from what? From systemic oppression in their old land, from war, from trauma, and the trauma now of being in a new land, right? So all of this has stacked most of us up to not have our needs met, simply speaking, in childhood. So while it could, and I really appreciate your question, sound perhaps hopeless, right? As you hear me say, oh my God, all of this is against me, even well-intentioned parents, here I am becoming aware that, right, they still quote unquote messed me up to some extent, right? That might feel like, well, what do I do now? We also now know, verified by science, which is changing. There was a time just some decades ago where we thought then once our brain was fully formed, I think we landed on somewhere in our 20s is when all of those more powerful parts of our brain that I referenced earlier, the prefrontal cortex, that's not even fully online until our mid-20s. So even think about that when we're thinking about a child, impulsive, right? They don't have that pause that you very beautifully just described as part of a new action to create change. So we believe that once a brain was formed somewhere around your mid-20s, it was unchangeable, right? All of those pathways, once they were fired and wired enough, we did not know what we now know to be true, which is that change, literally firing neurons consistently enough that over time they begin to wire new pathways with other neurons. Right? This is a scientific principle. What this means in real life simply is change can happen at any age. It doesn't matter how long we've been practicing old habits. Some of us for decades of a lifetime, we're well up in years, though change remains possible. So I want to celebrate anyone who is opening themselves up to new, sometimes even maybe challenging, maybe doesn't even feel fully comfortable to hear me offer to you the amount of control and choice you do have available to you, yet it is there and it is possible. And for it, all of us, right, it begins with being curious in the way that you are by hitting play on this podcast, but also by becoming more aware in real time, first step of change, like I said earlier, so that we can begin to make new choices.
What I love about your work and this book, you combine psychology with somatic body-based healing. And for someone that is unfamiliar with, because again, I live in Los Angeles. Couples come to me sometimes with heavy traffic, exhausted, and I am really implementing mindfulness, deep breathing, all of that. And I give them exercise, you need to do this. And they're like, what? No, just tell us how to fix this. But what I love about you talk about trauma is in our body. You talk about children. You talk about the gaze when a newborn is born, that gazing practice. Like, this book is not just about, A, B, C, D. You go very, very deep. And what I love again is you talk about neuroplasticity, epigenetics, awareness, consciousness. So would you mind, I know I said a lot, combine all of this in like one or two sentences for stressed out, busy people in New York, in LA, in all over the world, in my country, everywhere. People are like, what are you talking about? Can you try to simplify it, if you may, what you are trying to teach people?
The reason, and even going back to the first question you asked to begin this conversation, right, which is why inner child, why now? Again, not the first person, nor will I be the last to kind of speak about this concept of inner child, though what I had seen that had been missing about this concept of inner child, or just development in particular, is an emphasis on the body. And what I have now become clear, that lack of shift, right, from insight into new action that I referenced that inspired this whole journey, not from a positive, hopeful place, but from a very disempowered place when I was like, why aren't I helping people? Why can't I help myself? Was because that point of stuckness, so to speak, lives in our body. So until we understand that to build that bridge and make new choices, we need to inspire shifts in our body's sensations, then a lot of us are going to get very frustrated because things like affirmations, mantras, or even just simple awareness and insight isn't going to be the only thing that inspires new action in those moments. Because insight, awareness, new choices, again, come from that very powerful prefrontal cortex. What happens when I'm overwhelmed, stressed out? What happens is those old reactions take place. So to understand, again, that our body, again, my field even for decades only talked about how powerful our mind is, which is why, and I believe it's shifting a bit, but up until recently, cognitive behavioral therapy was the gold standard, right? Because it was based on this idea that the goal in a therapeutic experience would be to explore and change one's thoughts so that we could then have a different emotional experience and ultimately a different then reaction lived experience. What that is missing, it's part of the story, it's the top-down portion, it's missing all of the signals that our body is always sending to our mind. Like I was sharing earlier, in a moment where logically we're looking around and everything seems safe, but illogically, so to speak, right, my body is reacting to a short text, a lack of a text, an argument this morning where my body is registering that threat. So the work that I will always speak to is, again, not only understanding, because that's the first step of change, again, is insight and awareness, seeing in action the reason why some of us are remaining stuck is not because we don't have enough motivation or desire to change. It's because of those signals that our body is sending in those moments. And then learning how to expand our focus of attention to pay more attention to our body. The byproduct of a world of information where most of us are spending time on phones or in connection with other people, virtual or in real life, is we're not spending much time, if any, in our bodies. And until we do, and then we discover, maybe for the first time in decades, how much stress my body is holding or reacting to in real time, and then more so until I begin to shift my body's experience in real time, then I'm never going to be able to string together new action. So change really does begin with not only foundationally reconnecting to our body, but learning how to tune into, especially those three major systems that begin to shift and change and signal when we're stressed out, which is, again, the tension in our muscles, the breathing rhythm or our natural breathing pattern, usually when we begin to hold our breath or it gets really short and quick and is coming from our chest. Both of those are signals that we're stressed, similar to the tension increasing in our muscles or the numbness where we don't feel like we have access to any muscle at all. And then both of those systems tend to then shift our heartbeat. So our heart, our muscles, and our breath are great points to begin to refocus our attention throughout the day, because those are great systems that will shift and begin to signal stress. And again, why do we care about stress? The more stress goes up, the more likely we are to rely on those older habits.
Wonderful. That is absolutely great. And as a mother, as a grandma, I love to see how we always could choose to do better. I wish people like you existed when I had kids, and I became a mom at 20, and I didn't know. And as an immigrant, I didn't know. So unfortunately, I believe that because I didn't know, I gave all the anxiety to my kids. What would Dr. Nicole's elevator pitch would be to someone that is overloaded, cannot even finish this interview with us? They're going to turn it off and go to something else. 1 minute elevator pitch that could inspire someone to say, if Zahra at 52 could change, if Dr. Nicole with her PhD in psychology start talking about her own struggles and is so vulnerable and smart, maybe I could do something. So what would be your elevator pitch?
The first thing I would want to start with is normalizing stress. Stress is a natural, inevitable part of our lived experience. As far as I'm concerned, humanity is living an increasingly more stressful experience. Now, something else I want to acknowledge is how much stress has been passed through generations. You mentioned epigenetics earlier, and that's what you're kind of sharing now, right? I'm changing, my daughter's a little bit different, and now future generations are gaining a new experience. Well, that's been happening for as long as time has happened. However, what's been passed to most of us that are now adults breaking cycles for our future generation is biology shaped by chronic stress. Again, using that language earlier, right? A threat detection system, that amygdala, that limbic system, who's hyperactive, seeing stress even where it's not present, right? Overreacting to stress. It's resulting in then a limited connectivity to that prefrontal cortex where we struggle to regulate ourselves, make logical decisions. What that leaves us then with is a brain and a body who's always scanning for danger, right? Over reasoning, overthinking, overreacting, getting emotionally flooded, having difficulty pausing or responding or feeling at ease at all. So I spent a little time with the elevator pitch. I'm hopefully normalizing all of you listening, because that is the neurobiology that we were born with, which is what explains for so many of us why these cycles look so similar. It's not that genetically this is inevitable. It's that we've shared the same environment and we've passed on these beautiful adaptations. It makes sense if we're planning for a stressful experience that our nervous system does stay on and activated all of the time. For the large majority of us, however, though, life has changed. We're living in different locations. We have access to new resources, new information. Safety might be possible, yet our body hasn't updated. And again, updating our mind and body is possible at any age, right? So this is now where we can start exactly. We don't have to even remember the story of what happened in childhood because our body has memorized it. Our body is reacting from it in all of those moments, again, inexplicably, where we're having a big reaction or not enough reaction, or even who we have come to be, right? Me, the overachiever, as protection, because I don't want to ever feel not worthy again, right? With awareness, we can maybe see the way we've adapted, grant ourselves a little more grace and compassion, understanding that a lot of us have a very critical voice, right? Words, language, how we were talked to often becomes how we talk to ourselves. So again, those voices do not mean that we're broken or doomed or those stories are inevitable. That's just what we've learned. And now, right, with new grounded choices, with creating safety in our body, with learning how to regulate our nervous system, now we can not only create change for ourselves, we now know that that change is quite literally the gift that keeps on giving. We change the way our body functions, the way our genes operate in this environment. And those of us who choose, not only are we impacting, of course, all of the individuals that we'll meet and connect with, even if we don't choose to have offspring or children. And if and when we do, now we're changing the epigenetics or the signals that are going to be wired into their nervous system. So I'm hopeful that with a little, right, grace, compassion, awareness for why, if you still are feeling stuck, again, a lot of times this was the gift that kept on giving from our ancestors, right? Wiring us to live in environments, preparing us for safety and danger because that's what allowed them to survive. Now we have the task and the gift and the opportunity even, right, to show up differently, to notice all of the ways, the moments where our body doesn't feel safe yet, to give ourselves the opportunity to give our body the experience of safety, and to do that consistently over time, firing and wiring, again, new biology in our mind and body, and quite literally not only transforming ourselves, but again, transforming the world that we will then interact with and the offspring that some of us might have.
Beautiful. Nicole, thank you so much. And I want to just acknowledge all the great work you are doing. Self-healer community is something Dr. Nicole created that is honestly one of the most blessing in the world. People could join, and your books, your wonderful work. I'm honored to have you here, and I'm honored to have you as a friend, as a mentor. And thank you for everything you do.